Hey everybody, welcome to Pit Stops, the Podium, the Rev Partners podcast, where we talk to execs who have competed and won, taking their companies from high growth to high scale. My name is Brendan Tollison. I am the co-founder and CEO of Rev Partners, and I'm delighted to have with me today AJ Bruno for this edition of Pit Stops, the Podium. Welcome, AJ.
Brendan, it is a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
I am thrilled for this episode. It's been fun to get to know you over the last year or so. AJ is the CEO of QuotaPath. And AJ, before we get started, how about you tell our listeners who QuotaPath is?
Sure. I like that you chose the adjective thrilled. You were like thinking you're like, what adjective? I'm going to go with thrilled.
Well, you have like the plane for your podcast. So I feel like I have to incorporate some of those emotions.
You're spoiling some of the surprise, Brendan, of this podcast, this episode. We'll get to that. But QuotaPath, so we are a sales commission tracking platform. We're really based for sales reps. We're built by sales reps. So I'm a lifetime learner of sales, which we'll talk a little bit about. But QuotaPath was founded in 2018. And we consider ourselves product-led growth. That means that we have a freemium part of our app. Individual sellers, they typically have their own spreadsheet trying to calculate how much they're going to make on a deal that month. We help replace that and give them goals, how many deals to President's Club, a down payment on a house, a wedding ring, if they want to, whatever they want. It's a fun app, but we also then, of course, have the commission process for the rev ops, sales ops, finance folks to really make sure that they're paying their team, not just accurately, but on time. A novel idea, I know. But
so this is like music to the ears of our audience. So I think every sales rep will be talking to their organization about buying QuotaPath. So this is good. This is a good start. Well, AJ, before we get into our big idea and you kind of tease it out just in light of your background, but let's get to know you outside of work. So we have a tradition here at Pit Stops at Podium, which is to get to know our guest outside of work. So what are 3 things that our audience should know about you?
Well, you already spoiled one of my fun facts here.
I'm sorry.
No, I am a commercially rated pilot, and I do own a Beechcraft Baron. It's a twin-engine airplane, and I fly around the country. I'm based in Philadelphia, but we have an office in Austin, and fly Philly to Austin. My parents live in the Outer Banks, so I'm just up cruising around.
How did you get into that hobby? Like, how does that start?
My dad's a pilot. My mom's a flight attendant. So we can go down that path. But I actually started my first company, Trendkite, because I wanted to own an airplane, and I didn't know how. So I was like, oh, I'll just start a company. I'm sure that will help create enough money to buy an airplane. Another fun fact that's actually in tangent with the first one is that I only have one working lung. I have 2 lungs.
Wow.
Yeah, I have 2 lungs. I was born with 2 lungs, but only one worked when I was born. Didn't find out until I was 12 years old. I'm super healthy. I'm a runner. I fly airplanes, of course. So the altitude issue hasn't slowed me down whatsoever. But I do have like yearly checkups and nuclear stress tests, pulmonary function tests, all the fun stuff to make sure I'm still healthy.
Yeah, you will not be volunteering for a lung transplant, it sounds like.
No, not anytime soon. And I definitely was trying to be first in line for vaccination for COVID. So yeah, pneumonia and I do not get along, I promise. Yeah. And then the third fun fact is, as I have 3 daughters, I have a 9-year-old and twin girls that are 6. And they are the joy of my life. They're at a really fun age where like they're not just human beings, but they're getting more well-behaved human beings.
you were a girl dad, and your season of life. I know this probably isn't good because it's a podcast recording, but we're in light of the fact it's almost Halloween. I'm a dad too. I have 3 kids, and I was told like there's a season that's bookended by the Halloween years, which is like essentially 5 to probably 12. Where it's like that really sweet season where your kids are old enough now and they still like you, that it's a really fun time. So
yeah, but when they're 3 to 5, it's actually great too, because they can still do trick or treating, but then you can just eat all their candy.
That's right. And you're having some booze behind them
now they know. They're a little bit they're wised up. Like, wait a second, you just took some of my candy and put it in my sister's.
Yeah, we have a quota for our kids on candy. Speaking of sales, so that they get like their 3, and then we take the rest of the bag.
Teaching them young, getting them on that sales quota as early as possible. I love it.
Well, AJ, thank you for sharing a little bit about who you are outside of work. It's always fun to get to know our guests. Let's transition to the big idea. And in light of your experience, I think this is going to be a fun one. And it's for some of these aspiring leaders that we have on this podcast. It'd be great to hear your experience, and the experience that I'm specifically referencing is the transitioning from a sales leader to founding your own company. And so before we get into some of those practical applications of how you've taken sales principles or concepts and applied it into building QuotaPath, maybe start with kind of a background on your sales experience. I think that might be a good starting point.
Yeah, I graduated school 2008 from Penn State, not really knowing what I wanted to do in the world. I did know that I wanted to own a company and own a business at some point. My dad, along with being a pilot, and as I mentioned, my mom being a flight attendant, he actually owned his own video production studio in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he had a little bit of an entrepreneurial gene in him. And as I was graduating, I think one of the things that I was thinking about was how could I better my career off the bat to put me in a position to be a business owner. And I asked around, and my dad talked to me, and then my uncle, who was also a business owner at the time, he gave me advice, which was very surprising, and said, why don't you try out sales as a career? And in 2008, obviously with the financial crash and the recession, that didn't seem very appealing. You think of, yeah, I mean, you're going to school and college, you're like, what do you want to be? And you're like, well, I want to be in finance, or I want to be in marketing, or you want to be in sales, was not one of the answers that you would typically give. So I looked into it, and technology seemed to there's different types of sales, of course, but tech sales was something that was fairly interesting and fascinating. So I interviewed at this company called Meltwater, which is a Norwegian company. I know that we have some shared folks that we know. Tyler was at Meltwater as well. Mm-hmm. And I interviewed. I did a group interview. It was a very strange interview process. And that was literally the only interview that I had that was in sales, and got the role in 2008, started in cold call sales in Philadelphia. And it was exactly what you can think of is got on the train at 6:30 a.m., got there in button seat by 8:30, made 100 cold calls, tried to close deals. 1 call closes were a thing at that time. Didn't have any sales tech, had barely a CRM, didn't use Salesforce, didn't use HubSpot, didn't use anything that would help the selling process. And I had to leave I couldn't leave until 6 p.m. So I had a train that I could catch at 6:07, but I had to leave at 5:58 to catch it, and my boss wouldn't let me leave then. So
out of the 100 calls, how many were you expected to create opportunities from?
Oh my goodness! First off, opportunities wasn't the word we used. It was cases.
Okay.
Cases. We used the word cases. What cases we have? Qualified cases, the QCs. We had 100 calls. You could expect 1 pickup every 11 to 12 dials. So I would have 6 to 7 pickups during the day. I think 1 out of every 2 turned into a demo appointment. And out of those to 3, I could probably close 1 out of every 10 demos that I had. If you I reverse that was the thing that I did. I quickly reverse engineered at the time. And one of my later bosses had this point system with activities that you would write down that he made everyone keep. But the thing he taught me was that he said, oh, I'm going to just reverse engineer this. And again, 2008, there weren't thought leadership blogs. Right. There weren't a lot of people talking about this thing called software as a service. And I just recreated it. And then the other thing I did as a sales leader, I did really well. I recorded my calls on an RCA recorder.
No, you did not. Wow.
Yeah. RCA recorder. We plugged it in. It was super staticky. We were all kind of freaked out because we weren't sure how we were supposed to tell people we were recording calls. And there was that category was not in existence, of course, at the time. So no Gong, no Chorus, no any other platform. And we would listen to our calls and just try to get better at them. 2010, I moved to San Diego, ran the San Diego office, worked out of the San Francisco headquarter office for a little bit. And then 2012, I had an awakening that it was time to start a company. I actually went and saw Tony Robbins and Unleash the Power Within. And away I went. Trendkite started it, and I was the first sales rep and kind of ended up being co-founder and president / AE, and AE to team lead to sales manager to director to VP of sales, I guess, to CRO through 30 million in ARR. Never had that title though. Never had any of those titles.
Oh yeah, you've experienced it from beginning to end. I mean, in terms of all the roles you can are all the hats you can wear in a sales capacity. And I like how you even, described QuotaPath now as a, sales software designed by a salesperson. And so let's talk a little bit how your experiences in that sales. I mean, you still do sales, of course, but like the experience in sales has impacted how you've built QuotaPath. And I want to talk about three specific topics. There's how do you raise funds? There's a hire and recruiting aspect, and there's the people management concept. So let's start with the first point, which is, how is your sales experience informed how you think about raising money?
Yeah. And over the two companies, I think I've raised around 70 million, which actually doesn't sound like a lot today. It was like 5 or 6 different rounds, but $70 million over the two companies. And I think what my co-founder at TrendKite and I did really, really well is we reverse engineered how we wanted that to work. So we like basically created an endpoint of the story we wanted to tell, that milestone, that first seed raise. And in 2012, we raised our Series A 6 months after starting the company for $1.2 million. It was nothing. And that was 6 months. It was really, really quick. We went through a business accelerator. So we used the demo day as that ending point for us and said, okay, if we can raise funds, because we absolutely need to. I mean, my wife just had our first child. Our daughter is 6 months old. We're living in a 1-bedroom apartment in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. And I'm in Austin at this point. Like we have to have money to survive. So we have to raise money. So that was the first decision was, are we going to raise money? Said, yes. Okay, let's figure out how we do this. And it was really like any other sales deal where you create a list of opportunities. And so we had that our ideal customer profile, our ICP, and that included all funds that we could talk to in Austin because that was our worldview. And we got introductions from other founders. So we would just cold reach out to other founders like, hey, can you make an introduction? This person, we're doing this. And there were a couple founders that were funded by Silverton Partners in Austin that were like, we got to know and became friends with during the program. And all 3 of them were like super helpful because they were just like, hey, Morgan, the partner at Silverton, you all should definitely take a close look at TrendKite. So that was like the buildup. We had this napkin idea, got everything stitched out, had a few early customers, signed contracts, that same thing that you go through, just showing that proof points that minimal viable product was up and running. And in March of 2013, we raised that $1.2 million. I think that was a seed stage today. And since then, that's evolved. The world's evolved. The fundraising has evolved. But in May, when we went out and raised and did our Series A, we had $20 million Series A, successful ending. There were 50 funds that we talked to that were all over the place. And I just wanted to make sure I matched up partner to our business. And we had lots of great conversations. It was a fantastic process. And I just treated it like a sales deal. I basically I had my own CRM that I used Asana for. And I just basically had all of the next steps and just kept everyone on the same timelines, did the BANT or MedPIC qualifications, and just like ran it to success.
That's great. I think there's no reason why you can't do the same type of the application, regardless of who you're selling to. It's the same principles apply.
A sale is a sell is a sell. It just, the audience changes, the problem sets change, the pain points change. But at the end of the day, everyone's really just trying to make their world better. And so how can I, as a human being, make their world better makes it a lot easier.
Well, and I mean, you receive funding from Insight Partners, and that's not an easy thing to do. Are any lessons learned, or what was the pitch or was the hook rather that got them interested?
First off, I love working with Insight Partners. Absolutely, love working with them. I think they're a fantastic fund. We also work with Stage 2 Capital out of Boston, and HubSpot Ventures as well as also an investor. But Insight was not really on my radar because they're a $33 billion fund and we're Series A, and Series A and venture, you're going down market to smaller funds. But they had talked to us a bunch and we had created a relationship fairly early. They're really good about doing that. But again, I didn't really have them on the radar. And their head of Sales Center of Excellence, Pablo Dominguez, who works with a lot of their portfolio companies on the operating side, really had a strong tie to what we were doing. He completely saw the vision. he had looked at others in the space, but knew how we were thinking about the world and how that was matching what he was seeing. And then that got kicked up to partner level, and Rachel Geller, who's on our board, and got involved in the conversations. And I was already like 3 weeks into the fundraising process. I was about to end when they came in super late. And then like they moved really, really fast, and had a great conversation, had a lot of fantastic options. It's very rare. In fact, this was the first time as a founder where I felt like I was actually on the other side. I wasn't begging someone, please give me money. And I like, that made it actually really difficult. I had to have a couple tough conversations with a few partners that I absolutely loved. And like, those were tough breakup calls. I know the other side, investors are kind of used to it with founders. It might not be that much easier for them, but for me as a founder, it was the first time I was super uncomfortable. And like, when you think about sales, working outside your comfort zone is how you get better at it.
Yeah.
Right. So it was a good lesson learned, and I loved everything about the process this time around.
Well, and similar to sales, timing isn't always, it's always the right timing for both parties. And so even with the investors, like, how do you make sure that you maintain a relationship? Because it may be a no for now, but it's not a no forever. And so as you mentioned your Series A, there's going to be, let's assume there's going to be more, and it's good to have those relationships. And side note, since you mentioned Pablo at Insight and Mark at Stage 2, just for our audience, go back. We have podcasts for both Mark and with Pablo with great insights. But let's move on to the second topic. AJ, we talked about how sales really informed your fundraising efforts, but let's also talk about how it impacts how you recruit and hire people to join you at QuotaPath.
And I think this is like the most appropriate topic we can all be talking about. We just did a quick view on what's going on in the world, and there are 1.4 million LinkedIn sales job postings posted today. And in fact, there are 11,000 more postings than there are salespeople in these cities. And that's a challenge. And I'm like, I don't know what this world is going to look like, but I also know my number one job as the founder and CEO is to bring on great people and amazing people that I want to work with. I think that was something we did well at TrendKite, and something I wanted to double down on at QuotaPath. So I just like love having conversations with people that like can get behind our vision of the world and what we're doing and how we're doing it, and figure out a way to work with them. So I typically have the first or second conversation with a lot of like, even just the candidates. It's not to slow down my team, but I want to make sure that they have the founder perspective and the vision. And my job is, the interview process has changed a lot, is not to have a strong armed interview, what are your strengths and weaknesses type of interview, but rather, hey, here's QuotaPath's strengths and opportunities, and here's what I'd love for you to come join and see yourself working in. So recruiting, very important, very top of mind. And then just making sure the team's onboarded correctly. Because we were 20 people in May, and we're going on 50 people right now. So the company's more than doubled in the 3.5 months, making sure that everyone that is surrounding is well supported, that they have their environment cleaned up. And like, that's all sales, right? That's all figuring out the pain points and the challenges and doing a lot of active listening.
Yeah.
A lot of active listening to your people.
We had Rob Foreman, who's one of the co-founders of Sales Loft, on a previous episode, who's also an Insight company. And he talked about the people on the recruiting side. And a lot of what you just said resonates from that conversation, which is, instead of it's almost like you come side to side with that candidate as opposed to like an active interview. And it's like, how can we partner alongside you, understanding where you want to go? And it's, QuotaPath in this example, the right place for you. And so you become their advocate or their ally, as opposed to just kind of the interviewer in that scenario.
Yeah. And I mean, for us, we have to practice what we preach, because our app has a lot of that goal tracking inspiration. And so like our culturally worldview has to be inspired for everyone in the organization, of like career driven. We've always done half day Fridays since 2018. And like, that was a pandemic thing, but that was something we always cared a lot about. Things like having election day off, and like, those are things that we like wanted to be very mission driven with the organization for our employees.
And, even when we were talking about like, when you and I were prepping for this in terms of what we want to talk about, like you had mentioned like, hey, one of my like one of my rocks, or the things that I focus on, is going to be recruiting. I guess that important to you as an organization. So you are practicing what you're preaching, which is always a good thing.
Yes, it is. Always a good thing.
AJ, let's get to our final points. We talked about, the fundraising component. We talked about how sales can influence how you think about recruiting and staffing. Now let's talk about how, once you have those people in seats, let's talk about the management aspect of it.
Yeah, I think the people managing sales leaders and managing a team that are not sales leaders are vastly different things. At the end of a month, end of a quarter, you can sit down with your team, your reps, and it's very black or white. You know when someone needs to go on a performance plan and when they don't. That is not true for really any of the other roles. Certainly engineering, product, or marketing. I mean, maybe marketing has some overlap there, but in general, like how you manage your people and how you create that sense of urgency in a startup and organization is fairly important. So the third thing that I'm going to say that one of my main focuses today is just spending time with my people. And I certainly have one-on-ones with my entire exec team every week. I am so thankful I have such a badass leadership team. It is so, so good. And that is like refreshing, where Caroline Tarpey, our VP of Sales and CS, like she has just come in and completely owned it and taken it all over, so that I can spend a lot of the time, like the 10% of my time is given back, where I can start to skate where the puck is going to be. And as far as like the people management, it's more of like the 6, 12, 18 months that I'm really like looking forward, trying to make sure I put people in position to be as successful as possible. So that's what I think about the people management. They should be like, we're hiring great people. I expect them that they're going to do like fantastic work. We're going to create an environment where everything's taken care of, where we send pinatas that are trick or treat pinatas.
That's cool.
Bring this up to the camera. And that's great. Those are all fantastic things that we'll offer. But ultimately, we have to pull all of the friction away from them just doing the work on a process standpoint, so they don't feel impeded by anything that feels certainly not political and having a cultural implication, but also just process in general. Just like, this freaking computer doesn't have enough RAM or whatever it is. Like, just remove those barriers immediately.
Yeah. I like that. It reminds me, there's a book by Patrick Lencioni called The Advantage, and it talks about like, performance is easy, to your point, it's quantifiable in a sales aspect, but accountability is hard, because that's really more about like behaviors and actions.
Yep.
And that's not what sales is in terms of management. And so what I liked about what you were saying is you kind of set the course, you set the direction, how do I eliminate the barriers and empower you to drive, which when you get into sales leadership, like overarching leadership, that's a lot of what it is, because you don't have as much command and control on the actual engagements themselves, which makes a lot of sense.
I really like, so that The Advantage is one of my favorite books. I actually like the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team better by Lencioni. Like that's that one, because I like the negative stuff. It just like learn about what is dysfunctional versus the positive.
Yeah,
but a lot of the spirit of talking about the people management comes from that book for me, because I read it about 6 or 7 years ago, and I was like, oh, makes a ton of sense. It was really, really helpful thinking about my own business. So both books, great books.
Yeah. Well, AJ, I appreciate you coming on. It was a lot of fun to learn from you and to hear about your experience and how your background has informed how you built QuotaPath as it relates to raising money, as it relates to recruiting and hiring, and then as it relates to managing the people once they get on the bus. What are some practical next steps that our audience could take, whether it's with QuotaPath in terms of getting to learn more about your product, but also you as an individual?
Yeah, I'll start with the individual, because I think that's where I get asked a lot about from an advice, like, hey, I want to either invest in startups, or I want to get to know a network a little bit better. I'm going to start my own company. And I think that piece of it, we as sales leaders can sometimes get like trapped into our own team, because that's where you have to spend 100% of our time. But there is a massive community out there, a massive community, and the people listening to this want to better themselves. So get to know that community wherever and whenever that is. There's plenty of events. I don't need to recommend people. If you need like actual recommendations of this, feel free to reach out to me. Send me a personal LinkedIn message that you listen to this and would love to know some of those resources. Happy to do it. As far as QuotaPath is concerned, you can sign up as an individual seller. right on the application. I'm happy to connect with you and talk a little bit more about where we're headed, if it makes sense, or connect you with someone on our sales team as well. But the app is awesome, and we're crushing. I mean, we have 1,000% growth this year.
Wow.
So, and 2022 is going to be phenomenal. I'm so excited for all of the stuff that we have coming, and we're working on and in building as fast as possible, because we've removed all those friction and barrier points. But it's really exciting, and it's going to be a great year for us too.
Well, AJ, congrats on all the success. What I heard is, if you want to connect with AJ, go to LinkedIn, find him, connect with him. And if you want to engage with QuotaPath, just download a trial and become an evangelist in your organization. So AJ, thanks for stopping by. Love learning from you, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much, Brendan.
All right, talk to you later.